Hey everybody, today's lesson is on simple and compound interest. So interest, definition here, is the amount earned or paid for the use of money. So you hear about this a lot when people want to take out a loan from a bank. If I'm going to take out a loan from the bank to buy a house, let's just say I'm going to take a loan out for $100,000. Well, when I pay that money back, I don't just have to pay $100,000 back. I also have to pay the bank back a little bit extra because I'm using their money to do it. So what's happening is it's an amount earned. It's an extra amount of money that the bank is earning. I am paying the bank, so earned or paid, depends on which person you are, for the use of money. I'm using the bank's money so that I can get what I want. So I pay them back that money plus a little extra, which is what we call interest. Okay, so there's a couple different ways to do this, and it just kind of depends on what type of program you set up, what type of loan you're taking out. First one that we're going to talk about quite a bit today is what we call simple interest. This is when the amount extra that you're going to pay back is just solely based on how much you borrowed. It's based on how much you borrowed, how long you're borrowing it for, and what the rate is. But it's really about how much you borrow. So simple interest, we have a formula for that, which is going to be I equals P times R times T. All right, where the P, R, and T are all being multiplied together. And I want to go ahead and tell you what these letters mean. The I is going to stand for the interest, so that's the amount extra that you're going to have to pay, okay, for borrowing money. The P is what we call the principal. Okay, not like the principal of the school or anything, or even a principle that you live by. It's a principal. Principal here is going to be I'll put it in parentheses, it's the amount borrowed. Okay, it's the amount of money that is being borrowed. That's always called your principal. So whether I take out a loan from the bank, like I said, for $100,000, well, the $100,000 is what I borrowed, that would be my P. It could also be something like people that use credit cards. All right, if I go to the store and I want to buy a PlayStation or something like that, and I swipe my credit card, well, I'm not actually paying for that out of my money. I'm using the credit card company's money. So whatever that costs, that's the amount I'm borrowing from them that I have to pay them back. So P is going to be the principal. Okay? Then we have our R here. And R is going to be our interest rate. Our interest rate. And our interest rate here is always going to be our percent. All right? R is always going to be your percent. So if I said that we were borrowing money at 5% interest, 5% would end up being my R. It's the rate. And of course, because it's a percent, we always got to change that to a decimal before we do anything. T. T is going to stand for time. How long are we borrowing the money for? All right, are we borrowing for 1 year, 5 years, 30 years? What are we doing here? And again, on blue here, I'll say that time, when we're doing these problems, are always going to be based in years. They have to be. So 1 year, 5 years, 30 years. If they tell you months, like if you're only going to borrow money for 6 months, well, that's 6 months, and you got to compare that to a year. So 6 months out of 12 months that make a year, 6 out of 12 is a half, or 0.5. So the time would be 0.5 because it has to be in years. Okay, so that's the main one that we're going to look at. I'm going to give you one other equation that also works for simple interest, and this is going to be A equals our P plus our P R T. And just this one we use sometimes if we're looking for the total balance. All right, the total balance is what we call it. A. How much total do I owe? Which means, okay, if I borrowed $100,000, I have to pay that back. Plus, how much extra? Do I have to pay back an extra $50,000 so that total would be $150,000? All right. But what that says is it's our principal. It's the amount that I borrowed plus the PRT. And remember, PRT is just our interest. So it's the principal. It's the amount you borrowed plus the interest, and that gives you the total amount that you owe. Okay, that's going to be the main one that we look at. Okay, I'm going to throw on here just for now. Compound interest is a different way to figure interest because it's not just talking about how much you borrowed, all right? It's talking about how much you borrowed plus how much interest you pay back, and then they figure that differently. So I'm going to give you one other equation that we're talking about a little bit later, all right? Anytime that they say it's being compounded, then we got to talk about compound interest, and that's going to be A, our total balance, equals our principal, times, in parentheses, we're going to put 1 plus R, which is our rate, to the power of t. So that's going to be a different one if they say that the interest is being compounded. Then we'll look at that one. Okay, let's go ahead and do one. Example 1. Okay, example 1 says, find the amount of interest earned when you borrow $1,500 for 2 years at 4% annual rate. Okay, so it didn't say anything about being compounded, so that means that we're doing simple interest. Simple interest, if I write down my formula, is going to be the interest equals my principal times my rate times my time. So I equals PRT. And now you just start looking for things that make sense that you're going to fill in here. Okay? So the question says, find the amount of interest. Well, that means I don't know the interest. So my I is going to stay put. It says when you borrow $1,500. Well, the amount that I borrowed is always my principal. Okay? That's going to be times my R. R is always your interest rate. And remember, R was the one that had the percent sign. So 4%. And when I put it in the problem, remember that 4% from the other days, 4% equals 0.04. So that 0.04 is what has to go in place of R. Okay? Times my time. Well, time is the amount of years that you borrowed it for. In this case, it's 2 years. There's my equation. I equals 1,500 times 0.04 times 2. We go ahead and multiply those together. And we then get a final answer that the interest is going to be $120. So it said find the interest. We found it. The interest on that amount is $120. Now, that's our answer to this problem. Well, what they could ask us to do is they could say, what's the total balance? How much total will you end up paying back? Well, then you just think a little. Well, how much did I actually borrow? You borrow $1,500. How much interest do I have to pay back? Well, I have to pay back an extra $120 for a total of $1,620. And that would equal A, your balance, if they asked for it. Okay, in this question they didn't. But that's what you have to be aware of when you do these problems, or what are they actually asking for. Okay, example 2. Says, you get a summer job at the bakery. Suppose you save $1,400 and deposit it in a bank that earns simple interest. Okay, simple interest. So that I can right away write down my formula. Simple interest is I equals P times R times T. It says after 9 months, the balance is $1,421. Okay, well, let's go ahead and try to plug in some things that we know here. All right, my interest. Does it tell me what my interest is? Well, no, it actually says, it doesn't say what the interest is. What it tells me is that, suppose you save $1,400 and we're going to deposit it into a bank. Okay? Well, that's going to be my principal then, is the $1,400. Because even though we're not borrowing money, it's the amount of money that we are putting into a bank. So we're going to earn interest because our money's in the bank. Okay? So that's $1,400. After 9 months, okay, 9 months then is going to be my time, is 9 months. And here's the key, guys. Remember, time has to be based in years. So anytime that they give you months, what you're going to have to do is change that, because there are 12 months in a year. Anytime they give you months, you have to switch that and put 9 over 12, okay? If they had said 6 months, I'd put 6 out of 12. If they said 16 months, I'd do 16 out of 12. 24 months would be 24 out of 12. All right, anytime they give you months, you have to base it in years, so you always compare it to 12. Okay, so let's plug in what we know here. Okay, they didn't tell us the interest. They told us the principal was $1,400. Okay, they didn't tell us the rate. In fact, that's what they're asking for. Find the interest rate. So I'm looking for R times my time, and my time is 9 out of 12. Well, we have an issue here because we have 2 variables that we don't know. We don't know the interest and we don't know the rate. And we can't solve the problem if we don't do that. But there is one other number that we haven't used yet. And that's this one right here. It says the balance is $1,420. That means my balance, the total amount, is $1,421. But I'm not using the equation here that has the A in it. All right, so let's just think about this. We deposited, if we put $1,400 into our account, they're now saying after 9 months, 9 months later, after I put $1,400 in, that account now has $1,421 in it. Well, where did the extra $21 come from? $21 had to come from somewhere. All right? Well, guess what? It's the amount that you earned on interest. Because you left your money in, you left the $1,400 in the account for that long, they're giving you an extra $21 for depositing your money at their bank. All right? So the interest here is going to end up being $21. So let's plug that in. 21 equals 1,400 times my R, which I'm looking for, times. Now, this 9 out of 12, what ends up happening here is what we want to do is just change it to a decimal. So you do 9 divided by 12, which gives us 0.75. Okay? Let's go ahead and solve the problem. Now, when I'm trying to solve this part of the equation, the 1,400 times R times 0.75, one way to simplify this is just to, well, let's multiply the two that we know. So I'm going to get 21 equals 1,400 times the 0.75 gives me 1,050, and that is still times the R. And because I combined those two now you guys know how to solve this. We would divide by the 1050. They cancel out. Divide by the 1050. And 21 divided by the 1,050 gives us 0.02 equals the R. And again, you just got to think about what the answer is. R is supposed to be our interest rate. Our interest rate is a percent. But is 0.2 a percent yet? 0.02? No, we have to make it a percent by moving the decimal 2 places, and you end up getting my interest rate was 2% on that problem. Okay? Next type of problem. So now we've got to talk about compound interest. Compound interest is the interest earned on both the principal and the interest earned previously. So what ends up happening sometimes is if they say that you're going to borrow money for, let's say, 5 years, compounded annually, that means they're going to compound it every year. So what they do is they go ahead and figure out the interest. They do I equals P times R times T, all right? And they figure out that, okay, after 1 year, if you borrowed $500, let's just say $500, at the end of 1 year, they figure out the interest. So let's say you had $50 of interest. Then what they do is the next year, they start over and say now it's $550, and then they figure out how much you owe the next year. So it's quite a bit more complicated of a way to do it. And really, it's a way for someone to make more interest. So if the bank is doing this to you, it's a way for them to get more money out of you. Okay, for compound interest, here's the formula that we're going to use. Where A, again, is our total balance. Okay, P is the principal. Here's kind of what we did like when we're adding percent on. It's going to be 1 plus whatever our percent is. So it's kind of like the problems where we did 100%. And if it was an increase by 24, we got 124. Same type of thing. And then our exponent ends up being time. Okay, let's put that to use. Find the total amount owed if you borrow $1,500 compounded annually. That's the key. They have to tell you if it's being compounded annually. Otherwise, we assume it's simple interest. But this one says compounded annually. So I can say A equals P times the 1 plus R to the power of T. Okay, for 6 years at a rate of 2.4%. Let's start to plug in what we know. Find the total amount owed. Well, total amount is my total balance. I don't know A. We borrowed $1,500. Well, that's my principal. Okay, the 1 never changes. 1 plus R. R is our percent here. Okay, R is our percent. But now when you put your percent in place of the R, when you put it into the problem, remember you got to move the decimal point 2 places, and that's going to become 0.024. Okay, time, again, has to be based in years. It is. It's 6 years, so my exponent's a 2. All right, now just like solving any equation, you go ahead and do order of operations. So I don't do anything with the 1,500. I do parentheses first. 1 plus 0.024 is 1.024, and then that still has the exponent of a 6. Now you have to go ahead, do the exponent. So you're going to do that exponent first. So the 1.024 to the 6th power. So I type that into our calculator. The answer that you get then still has to be multiplied by the 1,500, and you should get a final answer then that your total balance owed is $1,729.38 for your final answer. Now, again, I could ask you another question. I could say, well, if we borrowed $1,500 and we owe a total of $1,729.38, how much interest was there? Okay, well then you would have to take this 1,729.38, the amount total you owe, and you subtract the amount that you borrowed, and you would then get the interest, which is you're paying $229.38 in interest. If they asked the question, in this case they didn't, they wanted the total balance. So anyways, that's simple and compound interest today.